Okay, we can start. Okay, thank you. Okay, so it's a great pleasure for me to introduce this last lecture of the session. So about the dynamic fragmentation in brittle materials. And in this presentation, we will present you different experimental approaches and modeling tools that can be used to simulate and to better understand this fragmentation behavior in this kind of brittle materials like concrete, rock, ceramic, etc. So I want first to thank my co-authors who is sharing with me this presentation, Maria Blazon, Marielle Dargaud, Yannick Duplan, David George, my PhD students. And also I want to thank all the people who have contributed along the years to these results. There are many of them. Benjamin Herzard, Gilles Rossiquet, Jean-Luc Zinsner, Bratislav Vukic, my former PhD students, Dominique Saliti, working with me in 3SR, and also I would like to thank François Hill, my former advisor, that I will show you in this presentation. To say a few words about Grenoble in a few minutes, I want to say that Grenoble is quite a large city. It's about 500,000 of inhabitants, the 16th city in France. It is the largest city in the French Alps, of course. And the university is very big because there are many students, about 60,000 of students working, more than 12,000 of researchers, and it is said that 1/5 of the city is working in the university. So it's a lot. It's a university city, let's say. And also, Grenoble is known as the flattest city in France. That's a bit strange. But the city was completely flattened by the glacier that was surrounded the city 10,000 years ago. Okay, and the weather is not so cold because it is only 600 feet above the sea. So it's quite pleasant to live. And Grenoble is known for the winter sports, as you can see, hiking, but also for several very big facilities like synchrotron and ILL, Institut Laue-Langevin. Okay, so I am working, as you know, in the 3SR lab, the Soil Solid Structure and Risk laboratory. And we are belonging to the Risk and Vulnerability Division. So one of the aims of the Risk and Vulnerability Division is to investigate the behavior of materials and structures under extreme loading conditions. And among our quite famous facility, you can find the GigaPress. It's a very big traction test press for concrete. So you can perform traction experiments on 70 millimeter diameter concrete sample at above up to 1 gigapascal hydrostatic pressure. So it's a quite big press. And the capacity of the press, if I remember, is 13 meganewton. Okay. But also we can perform dynamic experiments, Hopkinson bar experiments for spalling, for shearing. We are also developing experiment at the structural scale on the DESIS platform. So you can see, for instance, here a beam that was supporting a very huge weight. And in fact, in this test, we simulate the loss of the bearing capacity of the central column. That's why it is completely bended. This is the final state of the beam. But the lower support was released in a few hundreds of milliseconds. So we were able to simulate this loss of bearing capacity. And we record the process with ultra-speed imaging, etc. Also, we are doing, as you know, impact experiments, like edge-on impact experiments and plate impact experiments, ballistic impacts, with our new very big gas gun facility. But also, a part of our work is dedicated to modeling, as was presented by Laurent Daudeville, my colleague. And you can see one of his results. Okay, so the content of this lecture is the following. I would like to stress several features of the fragmentation process that can be observed in brittle materials under dynamic loading, and to explain you some small results that show the influence and the importance of strain rate applied to this material. And I will continue with some explanation about the modeling of the single fragmentation process based on the Weibull theory. And I will continue with, in the same framework, with the modeling of multiple fragmentation process under the DFH approach. And I will continue with validation, experimental validation, and new work that has been developed in the Brightholes Codex share, and that concerns the use of X-ray tomography to model the fragmentation process. Okay, so few examples. We have already mentioned this example, so I will be fast in this part, okay? But okay, if you have any questions during the discussion, you are welcome. Okay, so I have already mentioned the intense fragmentation process that can occur during an impact experiments. And this is very important to understand the behavior and the ballistic performances of material like ceramics used in helmets, vehicle protections or body armor. But I want to stress that fragmentation process is not only observed under impact loading, it can be observed in a quasi-static test. And for instance, this is a uniaxial compression test performed more than 10 years ago. I was in a master, it was my master project, so it was quite a long time ago. And you can see the very nice experiment we performed with Christophe Denoil. So it consists in compressing in quasi-static, so the loading is few minutes long, a sample that is a Diabolo sample, as you can see. And we can reach up to 6 gigapascal of actual stress in this part of the sample, the ligament of the sample. But what happened in a few microseconds, it is a Brightholes failure. And due to a release wave that propagates from the ligament to the entire volume, we generate an intense fragmentation. And you can see the amount of defects, the amounts of cracks that were triggered and were propagating in the sample. So of course, this damage is not a compression damage; it is a tensile damage. Okay, because as you can see in this numerical simulation, when the failure starts, immediately it started here. Okay, so the fragmentation occurred to release wave, and in fact the matter was completely projected in debris at a speed of about 150 meters per second. And what is interesting is, as you can see in this numerical simulation, during the next few tenths of microseconds, damage skirt around the central part of the sample, and the remaining loading is transmitted to the intact part of the sample. That's why, in fact, in this part, stress are going much higher than 6 gigapascal. It's a dynamic process, and we can reach locally up to 12 gigapascal. And when you convert 12 gigapascal of elastic energy in kinetic energy, you get this new ejection velocity on the the opposite part from the triggering point, that is 300 meters per second. Okay, so it's a dynamic fragmentation process due to a quasi-static failure at the beginning. Quasi-static loading, is what we say. Another example, a very interesting example. In this example, a target, you can see here, it's a cut view of the target, was impacted with a treat that is armor piercing projectile, 12.7 millimeter diameter, caliber, and at the impact velocity 880 meters per second. And what is interesting is it seems to be that the target is deformed, but not eroded. It's very strange, but it is made of ceramic. Okay, so why? Just to inform, let you know, okay, the target is made of two ceramic tiles that are encased in a casing, steel casing, canister, and all the target was infiltrated under vacuum by a aluminum alloy under the open porosity of the ceramic, through the open porosity of the ceramic. But when we observe this fragmentation pattern with a microscope, this is what you can observe. Okay, so the white spots correspond to the aluminum alloy that fills the porosity, the open porosity, and all these cracks were triggered in the first tile, and you can see the intensity of the fragmentation process. But in the second tile, you can see that thanks to the change of impedance between ceramic and aluminium, the second tile was quite preserved, okay, from fragmenting. Okay, other important point. Okay, so why should we investigate fragmentation? Maybe we could say, okay, the ceramic fragmentates and we don't care how it fragmentates, okay? But in fact, it is important, and this is, I think, the configuration that can explain that to you. In fact, in this configuration that was presented by Marielle yesterday, ceramic that was placed in, was sandwiched between a front steel plate and aluminum backing, was first impacted with a cylindrical projectile, so we generate an intense fragmentation process you can see here. And after, it was re-impacted with a conical projectile, as you can see. And what was observed since the Zinsner PhD work was that the velocity profile was strongly different depending on the fragment size in the ceramic target. So there is a relationship between fragment size and the penetration resistance of the fragmented medium. Okay, that's why we need to analyze and to better understand the fragmentation property of this kind of material. Okay, another example, a very nice example, it's the use of windshield armor against ballistic threat. So as you know, this windshield is made of several layers, glass layer and interlayer made of polymeric plate. And what is challenging in this case is that the target should resist, of course, to the penetration of the projectile, but also we should reduce this area. This area is called the area of vision loss, because the driver that could be that was attacked should be able to drive his truck and to escape from the trap. Okay, so we have to control the extension of damage. Also, this target should resist to several impacts, at least until 3 consecutive impacts. So that's why the intensity of fragmentation at a certain distance from the first impactment also may have an influence on the penetration resistance. Okay, so how to improve this kind of ballistic protection? The one possibility is to try to act on defects, because in fact all these cracks were triggered from defects. And the question was, but are we talking about volume defect or surface defect? And in fact, it was demonstrated with this nice edge-on impact experiment that the defect population was supposed to be surface defect. And that's why we can have some benefit from chemical or thermal strengthening. Okay, other examples, but I will be fast. The rock blasting. In this example, what was interesting is the people from a company called Nitrochimie company, French company, was not able to fragmentate a weak rock. When I say weak rock, this is a white rock with a quite low strength in compression, only 10 megapascal, and with a quite low bending strength, about 4.5 megapascal. Whereas they were much confident to fragmentate a very hard rock like a crinoidal rock. And the explanation was given from these edge on impact experiments. So you can see, in fact, it was demonstrated that in the weak rock, the compression damage completely absorbs the kinetic energy. And that's why it was so difficult to generate new cracks in the rest of the volume. Whereas in the crinoidal rock, it was much easier to let propagate the cracks. Okay, I hope it's not too heavy. Okay, it's okay. Okay, of course, another example could be the ballistic impact, the impact of penetrator, kinetic penetrator against concrete targets. And again, we can observe a large amount of fracture, of tensile damage that has to be taken into account in a numerical simulation. Bon. Okay, this is also another example. I go fast. We have been working on this nice dynamic process. It is an impact drilling of granite rock. And I can tell you that this tool that is made by Atlas Copco company is able to perforate 10 meters of rock in 1 minute. You can imagine? And how it is possible? Because a piston is impacting this rod. So compressive waves are transmitted to the bit buttons and to the rock mass. And in fact, to optimize this process, we have to optimize the size of defects, the size of fragments, because all the fragments should be evacuated on the lateral part of the tool. Okay, so it's very important to have no too large fragment, but not too small fragment neither. Okay, so that's why fragmentation properties are also very important in such application. Okay, so now a few experimental results to explain you and to show you the influence of strain rate in the fragmentation of these materials. Okay, so how to perform a quasi-static test? In fact, the simplest way to perform quasi-static test is to do a bending test. So all of you know this kind of test. So these kind of tests were performed on the present case on ultra-high strength concrete. And what is interesting is to see that the failure load or the failure stress is random. And it is not random due to the change of sample dimension. It is random due to defects. And you can see, for instance, the B5 sample, and the tensile surface was here at the top, and you can see the large pore near the tensile surface, whereas in B1, a much smaller pore triggered the failure. Okay, so there is an obvious correlation between the size of critical defects and the corresponding failure stress. Okay, but we can perform also direct tensile tests. It's it's less convenient because you have to glue the sample, so you can have a triggering of fracture near the sample ends. But okay, I will be fast. Another way to do it is, of course, to use the spalling technique, but this is now a dynamic test. So this test was already commented. I would just say that the typical strain rate that can be obtained is from 20 to 200 seconds minus 1. And you can use a nice instrumentation with ultra-high-speed camera to perform a full field measurement. And Dominic and I are working on this kind of test to derive displacement fields, and from the displacement field we are able to to get the acceleration field in the sample. So we are able to recalculate the exact level of stress in any cross-section visualized with the ultra-speed camera. And that's a method to measure the tensile strength or the spall strength. Or another method, of course, is to use the classical Novikov formula that rely on the use of interferometer. Okay, so, but what is important here are the results. And the results show that in quasi-static, okay, the failure stress is about 4 megapascal. At intermediate strain rate above 1 second minus 1, okay, we have just a little increase of strength of 4 to 5, 6 megapascal. Whereas above a certain strain rate, we have a sharp increase of strength. And what was also very interesting to see is the influence of humidity. So, for instance, you can see here a wet concrete, the blue diamond. The green triangle corresponds to wet microconcrete. So the same strength is observed, so there is no big influence of aggregate size, seems to be. Whereas the much lower strength can be observed with dry concrete or dry microconcrete. Okay, so this is an important point. And the second important point is the amount of cracks that now is observed. You can see in this microconcrete loaded at 130 second minus 1, the numerous cracks that were supposedly triggered on defects, on pores, and propagates dynamically in the whole sample. Okay, so in ceramics now we have already commented these edge-on-impact experiments, so I will be fast. But in my opinion, it is maybe the easiest way, the best way to perform a test on the ceramic sample at strain rate about a few thousand second minus 1. Okay, and you can see the fragmentation process and the time in microseconds. So this image was obtained with the HPV1 Shimadzu camera. And what is important is to observe that first, fragmentation process is a deterministic process. That is, you can see two samples of the same ceramic grads will lead to the same fragment size distribution. It's, I think, very clear here. But when you compare different ceramic grades, you can observe different fragment size distribution. So there is a strong influence of ceramic microstructure on the fragmentation process and fragment size distribution. And to observe, to analyze this fragmentation process, we can perform edge-on-impact experiments on what we call the sarcophagus configuration. As you can see here, it's a post-test view of damage, and also we can analyze with tomography analysis, X-ray tomography, all the fragment distribution in the target. So we can correlate the applied strain rate at different locations with the fragment size. That is also very interesting. Okay, but we are not measuring any strength with the edge-on-impact experiment. So how to measure strength? So I could say one of the most beautiful way to do it at high strain rate is to use the JP testing facility available in CA, French Atomic Agency in Gramma. And okay, I have already commented this kind of test, but I just want to say that with these experiments, okay, you can apply strain rates in this range from a few thousand second minus 1 to few 10 of thousand second minus 1. And what was observed by Herzar and Buzot was that, okay, first, the strength seems to be equal to the quasi-static strength of the ceramic, that is well known. But above a certain strain rate, we have a sharp increase of strength. And so we have a transition between, let's say, a non-dependent strain rate regime and highly dependent strain rate regime. Also, what was interesting to observe is that this point, in fact, this point corresponds to a test performed with a compression stress above what you call the Hugoniot elastic limit, so the elastic limit in uniaxial strain of the material. So you can observe that now the strength is much lower. So there is a possible coupling between compression damage and tensile damage. Okay, so that's important to prevent compression damage if you want to characterize the tensile damage of the virgin material. Okay, this is just a remark. So to conclude this part, okay, you can see several techniques can be used for quasi-static experiments like direct tensile test, bending, Brazilian test, etc. Main result is that random failure stress are random. Single fragmentation occur in quasi-static, size effect is observed, and we can also observe with bright material that the fracture energy is low. Under dynamic experiments, obtrusion bar can be used in this range, and other techniques are needed above 1000 second minus 1. Edge on impact test can be also performed to visualize damage. And finally, we observe multiple fragmentation, high density of cracking, strong increase of strength with strain rate, and a strong influence of free water in concrete, but or maybe also in rocks, because rocks could be also saturated with water. Short time to damage, according to the ultra-speed imaging, and a deterministic distribution of fragments is observed, and with a strong influence of material microstructure. So is there any common point between quasi-static and dynamic fragmentation? Yes, the only common point would be the flows, because we can suppose that cracks are all initiated on flows, and maybe on the same flow population, but we will talk about that later. Okay, so now let's go to the modeling part. So how to model a single fragmentation process? So I recommend, for instance, the Weibull model. So I will remember you the basis of a Weibull model. So imagine you perform a series of bending experiments applied to a brittle material like silicon carbide ceramic. So what we will observe, it is random failure stresses, and you can see the failure stresses obtained with these ceramics, ranging from about 400 megapascal to more than 650 megapascal. So you can fit a law at the beginning that is called the Weibull law, that was published by Weibull in 1939. And as you can see that this function fit very well this failure probability, so this stress distribution, and it is 1 minus exponential minus the applied stress sigma over sigma 0, that is just a constant, to the power m. And m corresponds to the Weibull modulus, and the Weibull modulus means the squatter in the failure stresses. For instance, if you consider a high Weibull modulus, you will have a front of a curve that goes up very fast, whereas if you consider a low Weibull modulus, the failure stresses are spread out over a large range of stresses. Okay, so m means squatter in the failure stresses, and the higher the m, the lower the squatter, the lower the m, the higher the squatter or failure stresses. Okay, well, this is very simple at the beginning, but it is valid for one volume. Okay, if you change the volume, we would like to know if the probability law is the same. Of course, it is not. Why? Let's consider a volume that is n times bigger than V0. Okay, that's very simple. So what would be the failure probability? The failure probability would be 1 minus the probability of survive. And in fact, the probability of survival of a chain, as you probably know, is the product of the survival probability of each link that compose the chain. Okay? If only one link is broken, the whole chain is broken. Okay? So it's the product of the the survival probability of each of these elements. Okay, and that's why if you use now this failure, the probability of survive, that is exponential minus sigma over sigma 0 to the power m. In fact, as you make the product of the same thing, it is at the power n. But as you know, the exponential to the power n is exponential of the sum. Okay, so an exponential, if you do exponential of a per exponential b, it's equal to exponential a plus b. Okay, so in fact, the n is going inside this part of the equation, and n, what is n? Is v over v0. Okay, so now you can get the failure probability of the volume V, knowing the failure probability and the failure parameters of the volume V0. Okay, and you can see that depending on the volume V, the higher the volume, the higher the failure probability, so the lower the mean strength of the sample sets. So this is what we call the size effect, of course. Okay, so another way to get the same result is to do it like this. Okay, so let's consider a volume, and in this volume, let's assume point defects. Okay, so the point defect are these red circles. Let's assume also random failure stresses. Okay, in this volume. Now we would like to know the probability to find B critical defects, so B red point, in this small volume, the Z volume. Okay. Of course, if you move the square, the volume, from time we'll have one critical defect. Okay. Imagine you can move, you can shift this blue square. Sometimes we will have two critical defects. Here we have three critical defects inside this volume. Sometimes we will have 0. But what is the probability to have B critical defect? B being 0, 1, 2, 3. In fact, this equation was provided by Jolin in 1991. And it says that the probability to find B critical defect is N. N is the average number of critical defects that we know. The average number of critical defects is the mean number of critical defects divided by the considered volume, to the power B divided by B factorial exponential minus n. So this is a very interesting equation, and it provides you the survival probability, because the survival probability is the probability to have 0 critical defect in this volume Z. So now the survival probability is exponential minus n, because n to the power 0 is 1, and 1 factorial is 1. Okay, so this is the general solution of the survival probability for a Poisson process. And now you can get the same equation than the previous equation. The failure probability will be 1 minus the survival probability, so exponential minus n, n being the size of the volume by the density of critical defects. And if you assume a power law function of the applied stress, that is an assumption, okay, that can be changed, now you get the same equation than the previous equation, so the Weibull law. And again, you find the dependence to the considered volume that give you the size effect. Okay, so you can see this equation. Here it's V over V0, but it is the same than this equation, except that this is a more general equation because now we can consider surface defect, volume defect. You can consider surface density of critical defects, for instance, and here you will have a surface instead of volume, of course. Okay, so we can also get this failure probability in case of non-homogeneous applied stress to a volume. So again, you consider the weakest link hypothesis that says that the survival probability is equal to the product of the survival probability of each link that constitutes the chain or the volume in the present case. So now you consider the previous survival probability, but considering a volume dV instead of volume V. And in fact, you can obtain this equation very easily. This equation of the Febvre probability depends on the maximum stress in the volume, the Weibull parameters, the Weibull modulus m and lambda 0, sigma 0 power minus m, the second Weibull parameter, and Z effective, the effective volume, and Z effective being dependent of the stress gradients, and it is the integral on the volume of the stress to the maximum stress ratio to the power m. So as you can understand, the effective volume will be always smaller than the total volume. Okay? And in case of homogeneous stress field, sigma equals sigma m, so Z effective equals the total volume, of course. Okay, you can also obtain the average failure stress. I skip that because okay, you can get this equation, and now you can demonstrate that the average failure stress is proportional to the effective volume to the power minus 1 over m. And that gives you the famous size effect predicted by the Weibull approach. So the lower the volume, the higher the average strength, the higher the volume, the smaller the strength. Okay. So how to identify the Weibull parameters? In fact, when you plot log minus log of the 1 minus failure probability as function of the log of stress, the slope provides you the Weibull modulus. And you can get the second Weibull parameter, sigma 0 lambda 0 minus 1 over m, thanks to the average failure stress. That is also measured, of course, from a banding test. Okay, so this is the way, for instance, you can find for a thick ceramic this kind of Weibull parameters. So I go fast. So you can see here the slope that provides you the Weibull modulus. And here, what is interesting in this example is you can see m is quite small. If I remember, it's about 4 or something like that. It's a strong squatter in the failure stresses. But what you can see here at the highest stresses, in fact, it seems to be you have a second slope. And in fact, we perform some TEM analysis, SEM analysis, scanning electronic microscopy. And we were able, for all these samples, to detect the cause of the failure. And the cause of the failure was very large grains size that are visible on the failure pattern. That's why it was possible, in fact, to separate both defect population and now to identify the Weibull parameter related to the first population of defect and to the second population of defects. And you can see here, okay, it was 9, m equal 9, and this is the Weibull parameters corresponding to each defect population. Okay. Okay. So according to this Weibull approach, I hope I am in time. Yes. So you can see that according to banding test, failure stress are random. Size effects is expected in quasi-static. The Weibull modulus indicates you the squatter in the results. With a high Weibull modulus, you should have a deterministic behavior. Also, the predicted size effect is the following. It should be proportional to the volume, pardon, to the power minus 1 over m. So it's a prediction of the middle that is very interesting because m was provided by one set of experiments. In case of surface defect, the Weibull model predicts a strength proportional to the surface to the power minus 1 over m. A second Weibull parameter is provided from the average strength and the effective volume that depend of the Weibull modulus that is known. Okay, so now why this nice theory is not valid in at high strain rate? That's a question, and above which strain rate. So that's what I want to explain you. So the modeling of multiple fragmentation process. So let's consider a ring like that, and let's apply a velocity, a radial velocity on the internal surface of this ring. So you can understand that the strain rate is constant if we consider a constant applied velocity, and it's about V0 over the radius. Okay, so what we need to simulate a fragmentation process, we need a failure criteria. So let's consider a Weibull distribution of failure stresses in each element that compose this ring. Okay, so you can see all this color and the corresponding failure stress in these elements. Okay, so when the failure stress is reached, the element is broken immediately. Okay, and what it can be observed is at low strain rate, 10 second minus 1, single fragmentation process occurs. Okay, n equal 1, or sometimes we have two failure. But 1, 1, okay, it is at 10 second minus 1. Let's increase the level of internal velocity, so the level of strain rate in the ring. At 100 second minus 1, now you have 7 fragments. At 200 second minus 1, 9 fragments, etc. At 800 of second minus 1, you have 25 fragments. So you have an increase of the number of fragments with the strain rate, contrary to quasi-static loading. So why we have a multiple fragmentation above 10 second minus 1? To understand it, one way to understand it is to plot, like this, the state of stress in the ring. So let's consider this ring, okay? This is the angle theta, so you can see from 0 to 360 degrees, okay? And the vertical axis corresponds to the time axis, but that also corresponds, as the stress rate is constant, to a certain level of stress, of course. So in this plot, you can see the state of stress in the whole ring as function of the theta position, the angle position, and as function of time. What you can observe is at the beginning, at time t equals 0, of course, you have no stress, zero stress. When you increase the stress level, you can reach the first failure stress in the ring, and you can observe at both parts of the defect, the critical defect, that a release wave is propagating from both sides. Okay, but the affected zone by this release wave, of course, is limited, and that's why in this cone, the stress is much lower. It's about 0, but the stress is still increasing far from this from this cone, and this cone is called the obscuration cone. Why? Because any critical defects that are that exist in this obscuration cone, in terms of position and critical stress level, will not be triggered, will be obscured. But far away from this first cone, other cones are triggered and are spreading the entire volume. And in fact, the fragmentation process stops when the whole ring is obscured. Okay, so after you have a complex wave propagation, etc., reflection, but we don't care. The fragmentation process is stopped. And now we can understand the influence of strain rate on this fragmentation process, because reducing the strain rate means enlarging the time scale. Increasing the strain rate means shortening the time scale, of course, for the same level of stress. Okay, if you conserve the same level of stress, you can see the level of stress in both cases are the same here. It's the same color. So you need to enlarge, to reduce the time scale or to enlarge the time scale. But the wave speed of release wave is constant, of course. That means that the slope here is changing. That means that the cone opens or the cone are closed. If you close the cones, of course, you will obscure less. If you obscure less, you will have more fragments, more critical defect activated. At the inverse, if you open the cones at low strain rate, what does it mean? It means that you will obscure more, so you will prevent much more initiation of critical defects. And this explains you the influence of strain rate on the fragmentation process. Also, you can understand the influence of the Weibull modulus, because Weibull modulus means the squatter in the failure stresses of activation failure stresses. So, for instance, with low M, so you have lots of strong squatter, you can see a big difference between the activation stresses. Whereas with M equal 20, so high Weibull modulus, the squatter is much smaller. And in fact, you can imagine here, it's much more difficult to obscure the defects because all the defects are activated at the same time, of course. So the obscuration phenomena cannot apply, cannot be efficient. Okay. Okay. We can extend this modeling to any kind of fragmentation process, surface fragmentation or volumic fragmentation process. For instance, this is a numerical simulation of a ring that is again loaded in tension. And you can see here first crack initiated here. And you can see around this crack, obscuration zone is spreading all around. But far from this first crack, there is no obscuration. Okay? And the whole fragmentation process, again, stops when the whole ring is obscured. Okay? So what does it mean? It means it's possible to extend this modeling to 2D and 3D fragmentation processes, considering a size of obscuration volume that is a shape factor by the radius of the crack, and the radius of the crack being the crack speed, by the current time minus the time at crack inception. Okay, so now how to model the fragmentation process? What we need to model the fragmentation? First, we need a distribution of critical defects, of course, that can be assumed or not as a power law function of the applied stress. We need also a law to model the growth of obscuration zone. And here the main parameter will be, okay, the shape factor, but the crack speed. That is also an assumption. And now the question is, what is a condition at a point M at a time t to be non-obscured? And we have to answer to this question. And you will agree with me that the sample is quite easy. The answer is quite easy. The answer is there is no critical defect that exists in what we call the horizon, the horizon of point M at time t. So what is the horizon? You can see it is the inverted cone you can see here. Okay, so if there is no critical defect in the past, in the history that is represented by this inverted cone, will not obscure this point. Okay, here you have two defects that are obscuring this point. Okay, so how to express this with mathematics? We will use the same mathematics than in the Weibull model, in fact. So you remember the weakest link hypothesis that says that the probability of survival of a whole volume is the product of the survival probability of each element that compose the volume. Now we will say the non-obscuration probability is the product of the probability of no crack inception in each space-time volume, so four-dimensional volume, that compose this horizon of point M at time t. And how to express this the probability of non-inception cracks in this dV dt volume? But of course, we will use the same law than previous one. So here, the probability of no crack inception in dV dt is exponential minus not n, as in the first Weibull equation, but minus the increment of the number of defects, critical defects. And the increment of number of critical defects is the derivative of the cracking density by dV and dt. And now we can get the probability of obscuration, that is 1 minus the probability of non-obscuration, and that is 1 minus exponential this integral, that is a time integral, but you can recognize the two parameters that are the density of critical defects and the obscuration volume that depend on the crack speed. Okay, so several results, several predictions of this model. First, you can simplify a lot this equation that seems to be maybe complicated to you, just assuming a constant stress rate. So let's assume the stress is sigma dot by t time. Now this quite complex equation is quite simple. It is just a parameter, two parameters, so n the dimension space, that is 3 in 3D, m the Weibull modulus, by the time, the current time t over tc, a characteristic time at the power m plus n, m the Weibull modulus and n equals 3. And tc is the characteristic time, and it is related to these parameters, so 3 types of parameter. You can recognize here, of course, the second Weibull parameter. You can recognize here the strain rate, and we can recognize here the crack speed and the shape factor that governs the obturation zones. Okay, but now you can also deduce characteristic stress in this way and a characteristic density in such a way. So you can understand the sensitivity of the fragmentation process to each parameter. If I double the strain rate, what is the consequence on the characteristic time? What is the consequence on the characteristic stress? You have the answer. Okay, thanks to this closed form solution. You can also now plot the normalized cracking density. I will explain that later, but what is important to see is the normalized cracking density saturated between 1 and 2 characteristic time. Okay, I go fast. You can define also a damage variable. What time is it? Okay, and you can define. You can define also. You can extend the damage model. That is damage model. So you can assimilate damage as the probability of obscuration, and assuming this function of the critical defect, you can model single fragmentation process at low strain rate that is probabilistic and strain rate independent, and at high strain rate, increase of strength with the strain rate. Okay, so I go fast on this. I will skip this. Just to conclude and to let, because maybe I am a bit late. To conclude with this part, with the Defetch model, so you understand it's an anisotropic damage model that predicts the strength increase with strain rate and the cracking density given the applied strain rate. Okay, we have performed several validation. I have been talking about that previously, so I will go fast. But one way to validate the model is to perform edge-on impact experiments and to compare the obtained cracking density. One way also is to compare the results with the spalling test results. So we can see here velocity profile predicted by the numerical modeling and compared to the experimental results. And here you can see the strength increase with strain rate. I go fast. Here the same kind of validation was performed with macroconcrete, as you can see. And we add an extension to this model to represent the cohesion strength for concrete. Okay, so there are several limitations. Okay, I will just say that the main limitations are, of course, related to the assumption that we use here a power law function of the applied stress for the critical cracking density, and we assume a constant crack velocity. And we neglect microinertia at the micro scale, but I won't go to these details. Okay, so let's go to the last part. It is how to use microtomography to simulate, to model the fragmentation process. And okay, my co-authors will present you two methods to do it. One is the continuous approach, so thanks to microtomography and to information on defects. In fact, we will consider a new type of critical defect law, that is a continuous law. And we will use the same damage evolution law that is function of this critical defect law. Okay, and you will see the result in terms of ultimate strength and cracking density. And the second approach is what we call the discrete approach. In this approach, we are drawing lot failure stresses, but we can consider the exact defect distribution that is provided by the tomographic analysis. And in fact, we make growing obscuration zone around the critical defects that are characterized from tomographic analysis. And so we are able to get the obscuration zones and the growth of obscuration zones numerically. So it's a discrete approach. And so after it's possible to get the same kind of results, so the ultimate strength and the density of cracks. Okay, so I let now Maria continuing, presenting the results with ultra-high performance concrete. Thank you.
So now we will see an application of the model that Pascal explained. First, let me say a few words about my concrete, just to understand what we are talking about. So I'm studying the dynamic behavior of ultra-performance concrete. That is a concrete with a very high compressive strength. We are between 150 megapascal and 250 megapascal. This is possible thanks to a very complex mix design that lead a very low porosity and a very low water content. So we are a ratio to water to cement to less than 0.2, and we don't have big size of particle because the maximum is 0.5 millimeter. We have the maximum grain size is sand. And also this ultra-performance concrete, usually in the mix we have fiber. But now, after we will see an application where in the model we are not supposed that there are the fiber. And the reason why is that if we are see the result that we have in the bending test, we will have the same peak strength for the concrete with without the fiber, because the fiber they have an effect just on the post-peak behavior. For this example, I'm using ultra-performance concrete with a compressive strength of 170 megapascal, a quasi-static tensile strength of 11 megapascal. So first, we start with a bending test, and we try to find which are the Weibull parameter. So what we have to do, just perform several number of bending tests. Here we have the result 26 bending tests. And then we assign to each tensile strength the failure probability. We have just to rank all the tensile strength. And here we have the formula for the failure probability of each test. And then we plot in a logarithmic graph the logarithm of the ultimate tensile strength, the logarithm of the logarithm of 1 over 1 minus the probability of failure. And we have that our points are aligned along a line, and so we get the power law function that gives us the Weibull law, that is the slope of our line. And then we can associate it to our strength, the mean strength that we get, know the effective volume of the bending test. This is very usual. And then, so we get also the scale parameter. So Now we have our Weibull modulus that give us the scatter of the tensile strength and the scale parameter. Then we pass to the microstructure of the concrete. So we have we make a X tomography scan of our sample of 50 millimeter in diameter and 100 millimeter or high. And how's working very fast X-ray scan? We have a X-ray source, we have a detector, and we have a rotating stage. Our samples is placed on the rotating stage, and we need to take radiograph for all the 360 degree to get the 3D reconstruction. So at the end, what we get is a matrix of the gray value that is directly proportional to the density of our material. So in our reconstruction, we have that the pores are black because they are low density. We have the matrix that is gray, and then we have the fiber, they are white because they're very high density. So then, using a simple threshold of a gray value, we can extract our porosity. We have a binarized image, and what I assume that to identify a pore, we need 5 pixels in diameter. This is because if we make a scan of the same volume with different resolution, I observe that using 5 pixels, my population of the effect, they completely overlap. So then, with image analysis, for our distribution of pore, we can extract each pore, we can extract the equivalent diameter assuming that this pore are sphere, and we can extract the coordinate of the center of mass of each pore. And then we can make a plot of the equivalent pore diameter with the density of critical effect. So we have to think that, of course, the density of critical effect is a cumulative density. So as the size of the pore decrease, the density of critical effect is increasing. Then we want to try to assign to each pore a tensile, a strength of crack initiation. And to do that, we have to go to the linear fractal mechanics, and we take the basic formula that link the crack length with the stress intensity factor, and we assume that the crack 2 times the crack length is exactly the pore diameter. The parameter that is unknown in this formula is just one, and the scale factor that will give us like the shape of our pore, how are the crack. So we don't know this parameter, but what we want to do is just to use the Weibull law to find this scale parameter. So what we can do easily is just to plot this function that expresses the tensile stress failure as a function of the equivalent parameter for different values. We have 0.7, 1.1, and 1.97. And then we can also plot for each value of tensile strength that is associated each pore, the respective density of critical effect. And of course, the density of critical effect will be the total number of pores divided the volume. So this curve is just the same curve that is shifted, changing just the scale parameter. And we will get as scale factor exactly that one that fit with the Weibull law, so with the test that we have done in quasi-static. Now we have in this graph the density of critical effect that we get using the quasi-statics test, and the density of critical effect that we get directly from the scan. So what we can try to do is that to extract a polynomial function that fit our population of critical effect that are extracted directly from the scan. And then we can try to use the model that Pascal have explained to extract a value of dynamic tensile strength from for each strain rate. So we have seen before the solution of the analytical formula. So assuming a constant strain rate, we have a value of dynamic tensile strength. So in this plot, we see what we get if we use the Weibull distribution of critical effect, and what we get if we use the density of critical effect extract directly from the scan. So how this is done is very easy. Is take the equation of the model. We have just to take this equation and integrate 2 times this equation to get the strength. So now let's try to do a discrete approach. So we take a volume of 30 by 30 by 30 millimeter cube, and we discretize this volume a small element of 0.6 millimeter, and then we want to assign to each element of this mesh a value of tensile strength, and the value of the tensile strength of each element will depend directly from this distribution from the pore extract from the scan. So this is also a volume that is extracted from the scan. No, we know from the image analysis the coordinate of each pore. We know for each pore the tensile strength because we have used the scale factor from the formula of linear fractal mechanics get it from the bending test. And we know the size. So of course, if we have that in an element we have more than 1 pore, the tensile strength of the element will be the one of the bigger pore. So here we have 4 sections, and we have we can observe the tensile strength assigned to the element, and of course we have to assign also a value of tensile strength to do our matrix. And we assign a value very high, 100 megapascal, because we want that our fragmentation depend just from the pore and not from the value of strength that we assign to the matrix. So then what we do is just to apply a uniform tensile load with a constant stress rate. So what we have that in time we will have before an axial behavior, then the fragmentation will start. What we observe here just with this simple discrete model, for different strain rate, we have a different fragmentation. Here I plot for one section the oscuration volume at the peak strength. So we can see that from different strain rate, we have for low strain rate that just a pore initiate. As the strain rate increase, the number of points that initiate is getting bigger and bigger. And the velocity of progradation, this oscuration zone, is constant. It is assumed to be proportional to the wave speed. So now we can plot together the graph that I showed before with just with the analytical formula, and the value that we get from our discrete approach. And we can see that using the discrete approach, we overlap perfectly the analytical solution using the polynomial function. What we can also to remark that for low strain rate, these three approach, they perfectly are the same, and they start to diverge a high strain rate. And the reason is just one, that we calibrate our model with the scale parameter with the bending test that activate just the bigger pore. We could not go here further because we need a scan on more high resolution, because the last point that we observe is when we initiate all the pore. So here we have some video where we can see in time the escalation zone that are increasing. So we have low strain rate, just a few pore, and then as we increase the strain rate, we see an increased number of pore that initiate the crack. So now we will see the same application for ice.
Okay. So yeah, we're going to see the exactly the same method. Yeah, it's okay. Okay. We're going to see exactly the same method, but on polycrystalline ice. So we are going to use the same material as I presented yesterday. So the highly porous ice. So a quick reminder of the microstructural properties. We are dealing with an isotropic material with an homogeneous grain size. And the macroscopic porosity of this material is about 7 to 10%. And we extracted with X-ray analysis the bubble size distribution of the specimen, and also the bubble repartition into our specimen by taking the center of mass of each bubble. So we also performed bending tests on this material. So here you can see the experimental device with the press, a climatic enclosure supplied by liquid nitrogen here, and here you can see the three-point bending test device with a specimen into the center. And so 25 tests were performed, and so here you can see the results. Actually, we have a log scale graph of the logarithm of the survival probability in function of the failure stress of each specimen. And so, as said Pascal and Maria, the Weibull modulus is taken to be the coefficient of the slope fitting the results. So the average failure stress of this test was about 1.7 megapascal. And so from this average failure stress and the effective volume, we could compute the second Weibull parameter, so the scale parameter here. And with these two Weibull parameters, we could compute a critical flow density that is a power law of a porosity that follows a power law of a positive principal stress here. Also, as said Maria, it's possible to convert our bubble size distribution into a stress distribution by using the linear elastic fracture mechanics theory. And so we are actually converting the bubble size so into a critical stress of activation. And actually, for a given stress, we can determine the potential density of critical flow in our material. So it's the yellow curve that you can see on this graph. And also, if we focus on the first part of this curve, we can see that the largest porosity seems to follow a power law. So it's possible to plot a pseudo Weibull modulus on these large porosities. And the value is about 5.8 for the Weibull modulus, so very close to the value found during the bending test. So it means that during this test, we actually solicited with largest porosities only. And that's why the shape parameter is very close to 1, because we are dealing with spherical porosities. So from this flow density distribution, it's possible to determine a continuous function fitting our bubble distribution to determine a critical flow density function of critical stress. And okay. And here you have a graph with Defage solutions. In red, you have analytical solution that takes as input parameter the critical flow density following the Weibull law. And in blue, you have a continuous solution, so taking this critical flow density. And here you have the ultimate strength in function of the strain rate. And you can see that the shape of the continuous solution reproduce in a better way the bubble size distribution, the original bubble size distribution. Eventually, if we, at higher strain rates, we will see, like Maria, a shift in the behavior of the continuous solution and the analytical solution. But the resolution of the volume we used was too low to get to higher strain rates, actually. So we should, for higher strain rate, we should use a smaller volume with a better resolution to get actually smaller porosities. Also, we performed the discrete approach. So on we loaded with an homogeneous tensile stress a discretized volume. So by using the real pore size and the real pore coordinates of the center of mass. And here you can see the results in terms of ultimate strength for the discrete solution. So you can see it's fitting almost perfectly the continuous solution. Also, we can add the spalling test results I showed you yesterday, and we can see that actually we have an excellent agreement between these test results and the continuous solutions we are using here. So, okay, now I'm going to now Maria is going to present you the same method on ceramics.
Sorry for the noise. Okay, so you saw the concrete girl, you saw the ice guy. So now for ceramics, what happens? So here you have the exact same material as the one that I spoke about yesterday. So it's a ceramic which has very small porosity coming from the sintering defects in between the different grains, and some big, larger porosity that has been added just to have like a nice material to study. So we can do exactly the same as what the others presented. So basically we extract from tomography this population of flow, and by classifying them according to their volume, we can, and their number, we can actually reach this curve which shows the flow density according to the diameter of the flow. So here you see that we have mainly two different populations. We come back to the small pores here and the very large one here. So on these ceramic samples, we've performed some same bending, 4-point bending test. So you get this probability of failure that you can fit in order to reach and have the Weibull parameters. So for this ceramic, we reach this value of average breaking stress, and we have a Weibull modulus around 30 here. So by taking the same hypothesis, we can link the size of the defect to a stress of activation under tensile loading. So here we still have the plot for, like, let's say, 3 different resolution of scans. And what I did is that instead of taking the assumption of Weber law for this flow population, I've actually tried to fit my flow distribution coming from the tomography scan with some functions. Well, no time for that, sorry. The same way I've actually used the bending test and the tomography to fit this scale parameter linked to the geometry of the defect. Yeah, so the bending test here is fitting with the larger pores density, which are the pores activated during the bending test. So we have a good matching for a shape parameter which is very close to 1. Also the same reason, we have some pores, the largest are very spherical. So what we can actually do is from the tomography distribution of porosity, we can fit a polynomial law, and instead of having the assumption of the Weber law now into the DFH model, we use this continuous function and we implement it directly. So here you have 4 different strain rates. The ultimate stress, which is coming from the DFH model, from analytical solution, and in darker blue, you have the one which is coming from this continuous population of flow. Now the discrete approach, so this is the small images that the others shows, where you have at low strain rate only few pores that are activated. Or video is not working anyway. So here at low strain rates, you would have like just 1 or 2 pores activated. But when you increase the strain rate, you have multiple crack initiation. So here you have the fits of the discrete approach, the continuous approach, and what is given by the analytical solution of the DFH model. And you have a very, very good fit. So here on the left side you have, let's say, a single fragmentation where you initiate only 1 crack. And on the right side you get this multiple intense fragmentation. So it's working very well for the 3 different materials. So this is the way, sorry, to test this approach.
To conclude very briefly, so you understand the potential of this approach to use the microtomography. It is really to be able to extend the modeling, the analytical modeling and numerical modeling to much higher strain rate, and at strain rate where the defect population that could be identified by bending test is not longer valid. And that's the real potential of this approach based on microtomography analysis. Okay, so we present these both approaches. I would just give you a few prospects as conclusion. As you understand, the work in progress concerns the very high strain rates, integration of this continuous law in a ViewMat subroutine to perform numerical simulation that are working at very high strain rate. Also to better identify and model the post-fragmented behavior, and to apply all these approaches to impact loading, single hits or multi-hits, for instance, for ceramic armor. And there are other many possible extensions and prospects. I could mention non-homogeneous material at very high strain rate, higher fracture energy and Toother material, like the ceramic that was presented by Yannick Duplan, the BIAC. Also multiple defect population, for instance the Forceram ceramic, where we had several kinds of porosity distribution in the sample. And we could extend also this approach probably to other types of materials and to other types of damage mechanism. For instance, I talk about mode 2 fragmentation processes, but it could be also pore collapse, adiabatic shear bond, etc. I think there is a big potential, and what we need for this modeling, you understand, it is defects, triggering of cracks, or triggering of a softening behavior, so that can be much more general than what we propose here, and a growth mechanism and obscuration mechanism or affected zone mechanism. Okay, so I thank you very much, and I give you another example of obscuration phenomena that are all the scientific talks that were given to present the DFH model among the years. And I will conclude saying that for disseminating very well a scientific idea, it is better to do it in a non-obscured area. And the non-obscured idea depends on the velocity of dissemination, of time, and the number of seminars you can give in your life. Thank you very much. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, we can have quick 2 questions.
Thank you.
And your colleagues.
Thank you.
In your compression test of 1918, you told us that the propagation of the cracks are due to tensile stress. But
Yep.
don't you think that nucleation is due or is driven by two-mode initial crack and then better than by shear stress and then propagation?
Yeah, yes.
by tensile drive?
In which case, pardon? In which
In
case?
compression, uniaxial compression.
Ah, uniaxial. Okay, uniaxial is just an example of brittle failure that generate Willis waves, and Willis waves generate dynamic loading because the stress is completely released in a tenth of microsecond. No, yes, the quasi-static was the loading, but all the failure process is fully dynamic. It is fragmented in less than 10 microseconds. So it is really due to tensile stresses, dynamic tensile stresses.
Even the nucleation?
The nucleation is difficult to say. We concluded that probably the start of failure was due to a roughness defect. So, okay. That was our conclusion. Yep.
I'm wondering, it seemed like for all the obscuration stuff, the shape was
Yep.
similar.
Yep.
I'm wondering if perhaps, do you think maybe that the shape and the delivery of those observation zones may change depending on the strength or frequency?
Okay, you could assume, you are right, that maybe the shape of obscuration could change with the crack speed, in fact. Here we assume a constant crack speed, but in fact the identification of the equivalent volume that provides the shape factor, the S equal to 3.74, that is close to 4p/3 for sphere. In fact, it was identified considering a crack speed of 0.38 the wave speed, and that's true that this shape could be different or a bit smaller for higher crack speed. It could change with the crack speed, and also, for instance, if we would apply this theory to mode 2 fragmentation, we should also consider a lower shape factor. So of course that's also a possible thing to check. Yeah.
Last one. Yeah, thank you, Pascal. In the same point,
Yep.
something that I did not
Yep.
in the case of brittle elastic material, once
Yep.
the mode wave has met, you have a sort of ringing phenomenon.
Yes, in the ring. Yeah.
Is something able to take place in this?
Yeah. Okay. Of course, these are Willis waves, in fact, propagating in the whole fragments of the ring, and of course, it is something that can happen in 3D volumes. Okay, when you fragmentate the volumes, all the fragments are vibrating for a long time, for a few tenths of microseconds or few hundreds of microseconds. Even they are not creating any more new cracks. And it's possible very few cracks could be nucleated due to the crossing of Willis waves, for instance. So that could increase a little the number of cracks, But okay, we neglect this part. Okay, we just consider what happened until the whole volume is obscured. Okay, we don't consider okay, a few cracks, possible cracks later than the obscuration process.
Okay, let's thank Pascal.
Thank you very much.
and,
Thank you very much. Okay. Okay. Sorry, we are a little late, but I think we start 10 minutes late. So, thank you very much.
So,
Thank you.
are we going to start at 10:30? 10:20?
Okay, let's start no 10:25.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. Yes, yes.